Okay, it looks like we're live. Welcome to Sunday night. I'm gonna try to break a story, outline a movie live in front of you guys tonight. Mostly because I was gonna try to do what I've been doing on these live streams, which is pick a movie, break it down, go through the outline, and try to figure out how to fix it, how to make it work. I feel like my Don't Worry Darling one, if you've watched that, is good example of that. Unfortunately, I just couldn't find anything this weekend that I really wanted to watch twice and then go through the trouble of outlining. So instead, we're going to do the other direction, which is I'm going to, using Netflix's Surprise Me feature, sort of come up with a quick idea, and then just sort of show my general outlining process. All the caveats in the world. Let's go ahead and switch this to this. So all the caveats in the world. There's no one way to outline, no one way to write a script. It's all a little bit different every single time, but there's best practices, and so I very much use an outline. I very much use a chart. This is an outline sort of chart, the visual representation of it. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's a million screenwriting books, and they all kind of are saying the same thing, just a little bit differently. Oh, I am peaking like crazy though. Let's bring the audio down a little bit. Okay, so yeah, I've read Save the Cat. I've read there's a bunch of them. The Screenwriter's Bible. The one that I actually really do believe in is this right here. This is Dan Harmon's Story Wheel. It's very simply, it's 8 beats. It's 8 sort of things, and I think what's so useful about it is it kind of fits everything. It's not so specific that it becomes formulaic and obvious, which is the thing that I've come across as a script reader. You know, especially the sort of less experienced screenwriters that submit scripts to competitions that I read for. I can pretty much at this point name what book they're going off of on how they structured it, because it does become that obvious. Dan Harmon's Story Wheel, not so much. So let me just walk through Dan Harmon's Story Wheel. The top half of this is the feature version, which is the version I'm going to use today. The bottom half is sort of a translation to television pilot. But let me just go ahead and walk you through it. So it's 8 parts. Number 1 is you, a character in a zone of comfort. Number 2 is need. The character wants something. Number 3 is go. They enter an unfamiliar situation. Number 4 is search. The character adapts to it. Number 5 is find what they wanted. 6, pay the price. 7, return, go back to where they started. 8, change, now capable of change. Let's go back to this screen because I think this is where it makes the most sense. Let's actually just show the chart. Oh, actually, yeah, we'll just leave it like that while I fix this chart. So if you look at this chart, it across the top it says you Act 1, and then it chunks over and it says 3 go, Act 2A, Act 2B. Let me just resize this and I will fix that. Let's see, scale filtering, transform, reset transform. There we go. Okay, so here we go. I have sort of a scratch pad right here, and then so it's going to be Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, and Act 3. A feature film is usually told in 3 acts, where the second act is actually a double act. I came up through TV mostly, so I kind of think of it in 4 acts because most places it's 4 acts, not 3 acts. It really depends on the network, but in feature film world it's 3. So basically I count Act 1, Act 2 as its own act, Act 2A as its own act, Act 2B as its own act, Act 3. So it's 4 acts, 1, 2, 3, 4. So beginning of the story, end of the first act, beginning of the second act, and midpoint, beginning of the second half of the second act, low point, beginning of the third act, end of the movie. That's kind of how I have it set up. Green is the Dan Harmon Story Wheel of it all. So it's you, need. So first chunk is you, second chunk is need, third chunk is go, fourth chunk is search, fifth chunk is find, sixth chunk is take, seventh is return, and then the very end is 8, change. And then across the bottom I have sort of the essential moments that I sort of pick out when I'm writing. These in yellow are the sort of the first things that I work on, because you know when you're conceiving of a story, sort of the pivotal moments are going to really dictate what the story is going to be about. So we have end of Act 1 going into the new world. We have the midpoint, which is the middle of the story. It's a big turn. Usually stakes change, or usually sort of the world changes. The low point, which I consider probably the most important point of the story, a lot of times it's the false ending, but it's the low point, and then obviously end is end. And that's about as specific as I get when I'm starting. I'm a big believer in sort of outlining in the same way workshopping, where it's all about revising, revision, revision, revision. So no wrong answers. I know a lot of people, a lot of writers, especially from sort of the novel world, are all about the like, keep it to keep your stories to yourself, to take your time, be patient, really live with the material. That's not how my brain works. I do the opposite. I'm a big believer in no wrong answers. Just get something on the page because you can always change it later, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So the reason I'm talking so fast is I'm trying not to lose momentum as I do this, because I can just see this dragging quickly. So yeah, so what I'm going to do is, if you've seen this channel, I did this experiment a couple weeks ago where I used Netflix's Surprise Me feature to tell a story, or in that case, write a log line. We're going to do the same thing because let me go back into speech mode here. The idea is the most important part of the whole thing. Ultimately, the writing needs to be able to stand up, because that's going to ultimately be what sells, what becomes the movie is the writing. But the very first thing is you need an undeniable idea. And I could teach an entire thing, or I could do an entire, like 2-hour long rant on how to come up with good ideas. The shorthand for me is, if it's that kind of idea that haunts me, that every 6 months I wake up in a cold sweat thinking about, that's the kind of idea that's worthwhile. That's usually a high concept idea. It's the what if. There's also the idea of a low concept idea. A lot of TV shows have historically been low concept, which is just it's characters interacting. I think the most obvious example of that is The Office. Either version. It's regular office people living out their lives in a mundane office setting. Low concept. It's not really a what if. It's just kind of it is what it is. Character interaction. Unfortunately, when you're trying to sell something, when you're trying to get somebody's attention, low concept is kind of a waste of time, because you got to get them to read the script. And so if you're selling a low concept, unless they are reading you as a favor, or unless you're famous enough to get them to read it just based on your pedigree or your history of writing, low concept just isn't a great place to start. And so the what if, the sort of what if this was that, I think that's why Don't Worry Darling was such an interesting idea to begin with, because it really was sort of the ultimate high concept. It was this beautiful, flashy, this utopia in the whatever, with Chris Pine as this sort of megalomaniacal cult leader kind of thing, but you don't know he's evil, that kind of thing. Great high concept. So I'm going to shortcut that. The other thing is, as a starting out writer, you're going to be doing what's called writing on speculation, a speculative script, a script that has yet to be sold. So nobody's paying you for this script. It's usually your own idea. That's where you're going to be starting from. Writers, once they've established themselves, can sort of go out for an assignment and sort of pitch on assignment, which usually means somebody with money, or somebody as a producer, somebody is going to take pitches from you, or they're going to have the idea, and you're going to pitch on the idea. This whole Netflix Surprise Me thing is sort of splitting the difference. And so again, I can't reiterate enough. The most important thing when you're writing, especially if you're writing on spec, if it's your own idea, if it's the you of it all, it has to be an undeniable idea, because otherwise, what are we all doing here? It is what it is. If you're running on assignment, you're going to be playing the game that the producers or whoever has the money wants you to play. So let's just do this. I figured Surprise Me was a good idea just because it's not me coming up with an idea. It's literally just, osmosis, or actually Netflix's Surprise Me, which is definitely not shuffle. I'm realizing immediately that even though I sort of made just a burner account to do this, it's not random. It's very much weighted on what they think you're going to want. So like I tested it a minute ago, and it recommended Wednesday, which is the most successful show in the moment on Netflix. Yeah, so, they didn't advertise themselves as shuffle. They're calling themselves Surprise Me, but I do see that it's going to be very much a Netflix very proud of themselves show. Let me show you this little, here it is. This thing again. So the same way I did shuffle last time, if you've ever seen that, is I'm going to do genre, character, setting, about, and network. Network is an add-on that I did because basically every network has a different sort of vibe that they're going for. You're not going to want to pitch the same idea to the CW as you are to HBO. I realize now I probably should have said studio, so let's call it studio. because it's not network. This is a movie, so movies are a little bit different. But again, you're not, like man, A24 is not going to be the same kind of content as what's one of the fill in the blank for any of those goofy straight to VOD actioners. Like they're a different clientele, so different kinds of movies. Hallmark, a Lifetime original movie is not going to be the same thing as something that goes to theaters, for instance. That's kind of what I'm getting at. With all those enormous caveats out of the way, let me just make sure the stream is going before I do anything else. Otherwise, this was all for nothing, which, it's happened before. Just checking on my stream. It's going. Okay, cool. Joy. All right, so yeah, let's get into it. So Netflix surprised me. We're just going to go ahead and find a genre for what we're going to outline tonight. Can you see that? Is that the easiest way to do it? Surprise me. And it has surprised us with Dead to Me. Okay, Dead to Me is, the genre is I guess it's a dark comedy, or like yeah. I mean, it's a movie, so it's not exactly the same thing as a movie, but I'll say dark comedy. Cool, characters. This is mostly just to distinguish between, excuse me, actually, let's do this. 1, 2, 3. The characters line is really only there to distinguish between ensemble and sort of hero or heroes. That's very much a TV thing, but it's still relevant for movies too, because you can have situations where, nope, okay. Anyway, I'm ruining it. Here we go. Characters. Let's do surprise me. 1899. Okay, so it's a big ensemble. That's what that means. Once again, Dead to Me 1899, and then my test one was Wednesday. You can see that this is obviously not random, but we'll say a big ensemble, which is tricky for movies compared to TV, in my opinion, because you have more time, paradoxically, in television, even though the episodes are shorter and the pilot is obviously considerably shorter than a movie. You have more time to sort of evolve the characters, tease out the characters. You don't necessarily have to sort of nail it from the get-go. It helps, but it's not necessary. Whereas a movie, if it's an ensemble, that means basically every scene it has to focus on a broader group of people, because you're going to have to jump the next scene to another broad group of people. So it's a lot of jumping back and forth. Think Love Actually. Think, what's another good one? Waiting. I always think of Waiting as a good ensemble comedy touchstone, if you've ever seen that. Anyway, setting. To surprise me. Elite. This is a TV show like Riverdale. See, I'm glad it tells me, because I wouldn't have any idea what that is. So it's actually, let me look it up. Let me see what Elite actually is, because I don't actually know. Put this over here. Chill out. Come on, Windows. Just be cool for like 5 minutes here. Fortunately, this is my backup computer, so there's no real information on here. It's a Spanish drama set in Las Encinas, a fictional elite high school that revolves around working class. Okay, so setting, we'll say elite high school, because that's sort of the thing. Getting 10 Things I Hate About You vibes already. All right, let's figure out what this is about. Go ahead and roll it again. And about usually refers to theme. That's what I'm saying. A theme. Slumberland, and that's about. Let's look up Slumberland too, because I don't actually. I saw the ratings for it, and I decided it wasn't worth my eyes. American fantasy adventure directed by based on the comic strip Little Nemo in Slumberland. It tells the story of a young girl who goes to live with her uncle when her father gets lost at sea and enters Slumberland, where she befriends a renegade character in a plot to get to the Sea of Nightmares to obtain a special pearl that might reunite her with her father. So it's about, everything is about family. It's the whole Fast and Furious trap. But even more important than that, it's about getting back to someone, or bad answer. We'll say getting back to someone. That is Slumberland. And the studio, so this is going to be probably the most non-working because it's Netflix, but for the sake of what we're doing, let's just go ahead and sit. Oh, I'm getting texted. Big Mouth. Okay, so that is an animated adult comedy. The easy one is Comedy Central Adult Swim, so we'll just say, what's the movie version of that? Because there isn't one, because Seth Rogen did that one with the grocery items, and it did so poorly. So maybe that's a reroll. Maybe that's a TV only. So let's redo that, because I don't want to have to spend my entire time trying to fix the logic of why this animated adult comedy is a movie. Let's just go again. Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. Okay, so this is a AMC, A&E type thing. So this is going to be like a, what was that? We'll call it Prestige. And also, yeah, great job Netflix for just recommending their best stuff. If this surprised me as algorithm based, I have some real questions, because all they're doing is recommending stuff they would already recommend. So yeah, I don't fully understand why it's set up like that, but that's fine. I have the same complaints about Spotify, if I'm being honest, because I've been shuffling on Spotify and I keep getting the same stuff that I listen to anyway. So it's Dahmer, and so this is a what did I say? It's like we'll call it art house thriller. I don't know if that's actually a good way to describe Dahmer, because I didn't watch it, but for what we're doing, it doesn't matter. So rolling back through it, we got dark comedy, a big ensemble at an elite high school, and it's getting back to someone. So maybe this is a boarding school. Maybe the plan is you sent to. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. You're sent to a boarding school with the plan of getting fixed to go back to one of those punishments that it never happened to me, but it happened to people I knew, where they got in enough trouble that they got sent away to boarding school. That was always the big fear. I think that's still a thing. I honestly don't know. Something like that. So you want to get away. I'm seeing, as I say that now, this is basically Wednesday. It's basically the plot of the TV show Wednesday. I mean, credit where credit's due. The algorithm that they're doing is spitting out consistency. Not exactly helpful for what we're trying to accomplish, but sure. Let me just see if anybody's ruining my comments yet. Nope, nobody has. Cool. Okay, so ignoring the fact that this is obviously the feature version of Wednesday, the show that's a hit right now, let's try to turn this into a whole thing. I realize I didn't do an 80-20. Let me build a 60-40. Give me like 45 seconds. All right, so we need, actually, can we duplicate this? We can't, of course not. So it's display capture and chart. Oh man, of course I did this. Of course. Okay. Let me got it. You're messing it up. 1136 by 50 by 54. Okay. I'm just changing the. All right, and then the one underneath it is going to be just the regular display. Nope. God, it's all about momentum, and I am tripping over myself already. I can already tell. Okay, so now I need to drop the size of this to make it fit. You know what? For the sake of what we're doing, we might as well just drop me on here too, right? Otherwise, who cares? View capture device, me. There we go. Okay. Ta-da. How's that for an absolute mess of a screen? Well, honestly, you know what we could do? But I'm looking at it. We could put me over. So that doesn't help our problem, though, does it? But this thing is too big, and it's a width issue. Is really what it is. Okay. You know what? I can. Oh, I suck. Is that better? I don't think that's better, but that's fine. Whatever. Okay, so dark comedy. That's an ensemble at an elite high school, and it's about getting back to someone. And so maybe they're stuck there. It's their punishment. They got taken away, and it's an art house thriller. So maybe let's go really dark with it. Let's say it's that sort of Vice story about those kids that there's that for-profit company that kidnaps bad kids and takes them to these like inherently corrupt reform schools and reforms them, but basically just tortures them because the staff aren't legit. That whole thing. Obviously, that's the true version, so we need to fictionalize it, sort of cut the teeth off a little bit. Otherwise, nobody's going to want to watch this. I don't know. Is there a magical realism element to it? I don't know. I'm saying probably instinctively not, but let's go ahead and do it. So, there's no wrong way to do it. Some people like to start with characters. Some people like to start with plot. I find it's contextual on what I'm trying to accomplish. I think in this case it's definitely plot. It's somebody has been taken, and so I think the sort of where does the taken, where does the kidnapped, I think is the first thing. So we'll make a card, kidnapped. I've also found that as soon as you come up with the epic idea for the scene, the big like transitional scene, that scene, a lot of people like to put it at the end or at the midpoint. I find the further you sort of stack it up, the better, because then you have more opportunity to play in the really interesting stuff. We have a card that says kidnapped. Everybody can read that. I'm going to say that's the end of Act 1 just because that's an easy place to put it. It's definitely going to move because I can already tell that's not a great place to put it. And we know that because they've been kidnapped, they're probably going to escape, whether or not it's a false escape. And so I think the escape is going to be, it's either going to be the low point or the end of the movie. We'll put it at the low point for now. Let's go ahead and put it at the, oh man, dusty. Okay. There's the escape at the low point. How do we want the movie to end? A lot of fiction authors, like novelists that I've interacted with, they don't like to write the end of the movie. They like to write towards the end of the movie. I found in screenwriting and in TV writing, you don't have time. You can't afford to do that, and so you got to come up with the end of the movie, because otherwise, when you're pitching it, somebody's going to inevitably ask you what the end of the movie is, and it's the worst thing ever for you to be like, well, we will find out. You got to say, hey, the guy does that and half the world disappears. Like, it's important for especially the people that want to have faith in you, to want to put money into it, to know that you have decided on an ending, and that ending, assuming the script works, will be reasonably satisfying and will make the people watching it go, oh great, I didn't waste my money. I'm going to say The Place Burns Down. I know that's dark, but this is an art house thriller, and so I don't think that's out of the question. School burns down. And so it literally is Wednesday Addams. That's fine. I don't hate that, considering how much I liked that show. That's the card to beat. So that bottom right card that says School Burns Down, that's the card I want to beat for this whole thing. That's really where I'm at. Where are we red? That's fine. Anyway, okay, so let's see what else can we do. Well, we need to. I don't think we're going to be able to start the story until we know who the character is, and so maybe I'll try to figure out a character. But I mean, what is this going to be about? Is this going to be about? Is the problem, is the enemy, is the thing that needs to be fixed the fact that they're at the school, or is it something not related to the school in general? The Wednesday Addams of it all, you think it's the school, but you realize it's the whole town. It's Wednesday's sort of sleuthing of the whole town, so they kind of split the difference there. What is a, oh man, dark comedy? Let me write down what I wrote. Nope, don't do that. So sent to shady boarding school. And the inevitable escape. It's actually kind of given me the story Holes, the Shia LaBeouf vehicle, but I obviously think of the book as you do. But that was definitely of the era. That they're all there as punishment, and they all want to get out. That's the whole thing. There's an aspect of doing the time. I realize you can't even see kidnapped, can you? All right, let me fix this. This is just all wonky already. I can already tell. Kidnapped, bottom left. Yeah, so it could be a them versus us, a trying to escape the prison. The big guy throws the chair through the window to get out. Don't mind the dog. He's just kind of a jerk. I really wish he wouldn't bark though. I think it's too easy to make the school be the enemy. I think the enemy needs to be something more specific. So maybe let's try to figure out the character, because so far we know they got kidnapped. There's going to be an escape. Inevitably, the escape will fail. So let me write that down. And the reason if I haven't said this already, which I think I have, the reason I do this so fast is no wrong answers. I found it's way more efficient to just be messy and then fix it in the edit, fix it in the rewrite, than it is to just refuse to put stuff on the board. I feel like that's what a lot of people have so much trouble with, is they're not willing to just open themselves up to being wrong, and so they go very, very slowly. I have a writing partner who actually, until he's got his first or second draft properly done, nobody gets to even talk to him about it. Yeah, different ways of working. I like working fast just because I found that even though I work, I'd say probably 25% faster than I'm comfortable with, it sort of all comes out in the wash, because it gives me the opportunity to sort of freewheel into a place I wouldn't have necessarily freewheeled, because if you start saying no in your head, it doesn't make it to the page. So if you just kind of fool around, it weirdly takes a good shape. I think in music you can do this in a group, and it's called jamming, or getting into a groove where everybody sort of improvises off each other. You can do this in a writing room. I super enjoy it when it works. It doesn't always work, but me beating my head against the wall. This is how I work too. So we got kidnapped, escape fails, school burns down. Oh man, okay. So what did they have to do? Maybe that's where we started. So they did something bad. What did they do that was so bad that sent them to boarding school? The comedy version of this, which is not, it's an art house thriller, as we've established. The comedy version of this is they burn down their first school, and therefore there's a great symmetry to the end where they burn down their other school. But because we're not doing comedy, we're not doing an art house thriller, we need to take this a little bit more. The dramatic irony is a little bit too silly for that. What did they do? Well, were they helping someone? Are we going to try to establish them as the person who gets in over their head because they're too accommodating and they haven't sort of figured out their dorm morality yet? Where, you know, because that's the one where they help and they get caught because they're not good at it, because they're not good at being bad or whatever. And so the big sort of third act sort of story is now that they have a little bit more experience, a little bit more perspective, they can go back into that environment and they can be the leader instead of the one that just gets caught with their pants down, because they're wiser for it. I think that's interesting. So caught doing bad, we'll just say. I don't know what that means yet because I don't really know the character, but I feel like that's forward progress. Let's throw it up on the board. Caught doing bad. Maybe that'll be the third scene because we need a scene where we don't know that they're doing bad yet. So we need an opening scene. Don't know what that is yet. But I'll just write it on there. So, but I hope it's really obvious by me doing this that this is not some special skill. Although I have a long hair poking me in the back of the ear, this is not some special skill that only some people have. It's just process of elimination. The reason I'm going so fast and because I've done this enough that there's muscle memory and there's confidence and I've written enough things that I know that this works for me. That's why I'm sort of as messy as I am. But this is not anything unique to anybody. The whole thing that I'm all about is if you're speaking the language of something of the story you're trying to tell, you've already done half or 2/3 of the trouble. Now you just have to sort of organize your thoughts in a way that actually makes it work to everybody else, because ironically, a lot of people that just write one script and then just give up, it's because the beautiful story that they told in their head is inherently perfect because their brain sort of filled in the gaps. But when they actually go through the trouble of trying to write the story themselves, they realize it's more difficult than they expected and it becomes a problem. Let me just go up with this a little bit. There we go. And that becomes a problem. Yeah, so it's like a translation problem. They went through all the trouble of experiencing the idea and falling in love with the idea and all this stuff, and sort of their brain sort of told them the perfect story. But when it came to getting the brain to communicate with the fingers to type out the story and actually make the story and the scenes work, that's where all the trouble came out, because it is inherently hard to translate from this to this or from this to, you know, the screen. It's a different set of skills, and so the more efficient you can get sort of this to this, the better. That's why I feel like a lot of, you know, directors who write tend to have a little bit of a leg up on their movies. Better chance of their movies working and making sense because they're the sort of the connections between the writing side of it and the visual storytelling side of it are a lot closer than somebody who just writes or somebody who just directs. Never say never. That's just, this is me talking fast and loose. Opening scene, caught doing bad, kidnapped, and so the unfamiliar is the new place, so it's the new school, obviously. And so a lot of times when I'm doing this, obviously kidnapped and going to the new school are pairing, and so when I move them, they'll probably move together. Escape and escape fails also are pairing, and so that might go together. It's nice to have the thing happen and then cut away to something else and then come back to the consequences. I've been seeing a lot of movies lately. I don't know if Don't Worry Darling did this, but a lot of, what was it that I was watching where they would present a problem and then they would solve the problem in the same moment. And on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of how real life happens sometimes. But when you really think about it, That's not how it works, and that's not especially how screenwriting and TV writing works, because you want to build up the tension as far as you can go in the scene and then cut out before you sort of lose momentum, go to something else, build momentum on that, and then go back to what you're doing. And so if somebody says, I love you, usually you don't want somebody to go, or actually that's not a good example. If somebody gets down on the knee and says, will you marry me? You don't want to live out the scene and somebody go, yes, I will marry you. Congratulations. That's how real life plays out. But a better way to write it is, will you marry me? And then you see the reaction of the person and then you cut away. So you don't know if they said yes or not. You go to something else, you restart, you explore something else, and then you go back to either that moment or the moment after that moment, or more likely, because we know we can sort of intellectually fill in, they said yes. Now we have to deal with the consequences of that. Yeah, so I think that's, man, yeah, I'm trying to think of an example of when that happens though, but it happens in writing all the time, when I'm reading scripts where they go through all the trouble of building this problem and then they solve it in the very same scene that they built it in. And from a TV point of view, that's where the commercial break goes, honestly. But just from a storytelling point of view, that's not satisfying, because you're not telling a story, you're summarizing an event at that point, because the tension goes away if you see the entire thing play out in real time. My 2 cents anyway. All right, so opening scene, caught doing bad, kidnapped, new school, escape fails, school burns down. Go back to my list. Shady, boring school, reform school, inevitable escape. So maybe we'll try to figure out a character, since I feel like I'm getting stuck. Who is specifically the character who shouldn't be in this environment? Who is the character either most suited for this environment or ideally most not suited for this environment? The obvious joke is, if it's a prison movie, you want the most feeble, vulnerable, easily to be manipulated person going to prison. I think a good example of that is Mike Judge's Let's Go to Prison, and Will Arnett's sort of just super vanilla guy character going to prison. We know it's going to go extra bad for him because he's so not prison material. In the same light, who goes to the boarding school who is just not built for that? A straight A student, a scholar, a prodigy, a child prodigy maybe? I like that. I think that's a good high concept, is what in their life would involve a child prodigy ending up in a, let's look at the time, ending up in a situation where they end up at a boarding school. I like that a lot. So maybe like what kind of prodigy isn't inherently translatable to evil? Because if you have like a math prodigy or a piano prodigy, there's already sort of an intellectual jump you can make where maybe they're good at picking locks, or maybe they're good at hacking on computers. They already have sort of the inherent ability that would make them useful at a boarding school. So what kind of prodigy could not inherently be useful at a boarding school? God, what kind of prodigies are it anymore other than piano and math, and chess, I guess, since the Queen's Gambit was that whole thing. What kind of prodigy would be at their worst at a boarding school? Well, Greta Thunberg for one. So like a social, like a social movement kind of person. I consider her a bit of a prodigy. I think that's weird, too abstract of an idea to call her a prodigy to make that work, but I'm just thinking out loud. What kind of prodigy at a punishing boarding school that is sort of set up to reform you, which means in the American definition of a reform school, it gets grim. I consider it basically the 2022 version of what would have been like a nut house in the 50s and 60s, if that makes sense. What kind of person, what kind of prodigy would inherently do bad at a painting, maybe? That's an art prodigy. That's weird though, because like painting and art, that's so abstract, that doesn't necessarily lend to good skills. I think we just got to walk it back. I think it needs to be somebody with perfect grades who's never broken a rule in their life. So we'll call them perfect grades person. And so I have over here on the left, I have scratch pad. That's where I have stuff that doesn't fit in the plot. So character, straight A's, and rule following, which makes their act of rebellion that gets them caught that much more interesting, because everybody rebels, but everybody rebels their own way. A person coming from a broken family, whose parents, may not show up at night because they're off doing something nefarious, that person has a different kind of rebelling than a person who came from like one of those preparatory schools that sends you to Ivy Leagues after high school. Maybe that. So maybe it's a prep school. Ooh, that's interesting. So it's like the perfect prep school person. Let's do this. The perfect prep school person. Again, prep schools was never a thing. I only understood prep schools through television because I grew up in the woods. But then when I moved to California, I realized that most of the people I interacted with that were my age had gone to prep schools, because the name of the game in California is you get your kid into prep schools because that's how they go to a good college. I grew up in the woods. That paradigm didn't exist for me. I don't think it exists in the Midwest. I definitely think it exists on the East Coast. But yeah, as somebody who grew up in the woods, that was such a foreign idea. And so when I went to college and realized that half the people I went to college with were like me, except probably had a little bit more money, let's be honest. And the other half were like California implants, Texas implants, East Coasterners is a word, I guess. And they would have gone to a prep school specifically to get into this college. I'm not saying I went to a good college. I'm just saying they had a completely different way of things. They were drinking fancy tea. I was drinking Gatorade and trying not to get kicked off the soccer team, that kind of thing. So anyway, I was not a student athlete. I don't know why I even said soccer team. I quit the JV team because I sucked. Prep school straight A's. And this person is a bit of a stereotype. I will admit that, so we'll probably have to adjust that character a little bit. Yeah, and then again, I like jumping back and forth. Again, some people like to build the whole plot and then put characters in it. Some people like to build a great ensemble of characters and then build the plot around it. There's no wrong answers. I like to jump around if I get stuck. Excuse me, no wrong answers. That's what I'm all about. So we have a prep school person. This will be an ensemble. I realize that, but the logic of getting an ensemble to this place all the same way, I can't wrap my head around. There's definitely examples of that working, like the 100 or Lost, or all these sort of super high concept, how did we get here kind of shows. But this is not a show, this is a movie. And so I think starting with one character and then getting into the ensemble that is the weird, wicked school that we're going to be in is the move. I'm just trying to rationalize the ensemble aspect of it since I'm spending a lot of time on the prep school straight A's person. So the prep school straight A's person wins an award or something. I don't know. That opening scene may be the last scene I come up with, just because opening scenes. You could teach a class on opening scenes because they're so woof. I think opening scenes in TV are so much, the jeopardy is so much higher because people can just turn away. Whereas if you bought the ticket to the movie reasonably, you will sit through an opening scene even if it absolutely sucks. TV, I don't think that's the case. Yeah, this is a movie. Some opening scene where she wins an award probably, and then you could see there's another scene where she gets congratulated or something, or you can see that they sort of double down on the, we'll say wins an award. And so the second scene will be doubling down on the prep schooling thing. And then we'll have one more scene where we don't know what she's doing. So I'm going to say her. So maybe her big plan. And then things go awry. So these aren't even scenes. These are just beats. I most of the time I think in beats before I do scenes themselves, because scenes are going to be in the context of everything. So character zone of comfort. That's 10. That's 5 scenes. I think so. You character zone of comfort. This prep school, straight A's, never done anything wrong in her life. Is living the pressures of prep school. I have a big chip on my shoulder. That's neither here nor there. She's prep schooling. She's straight A'ing. She wins an award in the first scene. Second scene, we have a scene that doubles down on her whole prep school thing. Maybe some senator or somebody goes, "Hey, if you keep up the good work, come find me in the summer. We'll do an internship. Well, you'll be the assistant to the press secretary of blah blah blah." I don't know. I don't know how prep schools work. I'm obviously talking out of school. Pun, I guess, technically. Yikes. Next scene is her big plan, and so she's working on something, and so it's tonally different than what we've seen before, because we've seen her in the uniform accepting the award. Powerful people are shaking her hand saying you're going to be somebody, and now she's doing this thing that's completely different. Maybe it's a little seedy, maybe it's a little sketchy, who knows. Things go awry. So this is where she's actually executing what she's doing. Could be alone, could be with a group. I'm thinking it would be nice for her to be alone in this, because that way her compatibility with the ensemble is going to be that much more annoying for her. Because if there's one thing a person, a homebody, an introvert hates more than anything else, it's being forced into the group and being on display in front of the group. And so I think that's good. So things go awry, caught doing bad, and then the punishment is all of the consequences. So we'll do initial consequences. And then maybe things are okay. And then something has to happen at things are okay to really make it bad. So let's see, A-R-E. Well, I wrote it wrong twice. Great job. And so maybe more consequences. And the more consequences are something unexpected. So she broke into the library and stole a rare book, and you find out that by stealing the book, the school now lost their major donor because it was offensive that they stole that particular book. I don't know. So something in the vein of if she had done more research, or if she was better at this, she would have expected it. But because she sucks at being bad, it catches up with her. But then she figures it out, so she solves it because she's still in her own world. But there's going to be a foreboding that we're going to see, because bad deeds do get punished. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Yeah, kidnapped. Okay, cool. Yeah, I buy that. So far we have the first act is basically how to get to the shady boarding school. All of this could be gone away, and we could start this movie at the boarding school if we have to, depending on how interesting it is, because maybe the kidnapping is the most interesting thing in the first act, and if that's the case, dump out all the establishing stuff. The only problem with dumping out all the establishing stuff is then you got to figure out how to work it into the rest of Act 1 or into Act 2 on who she is. And the later the information comes about establishing who she is as a character, the more trouble you're going to run yourself, because I don't know, credit where credit's due. A lot of things can happen out of order. But you do need to sort of, you need to establish context and then consequences, and then establish context and then consequences. And so that's why, like, other than the fact that it's a freaking absolute cliche, but the whole, like, how did I get here? Record scratch, flashback to blah, 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 which a lot of movies do. I have such a problem with that because I feel like that's such a cop-out, because that means that we're going to have to wait an entire act to see the exciting scene that they just showed most or all of us already of before we go back to it, where it's sloppy. It's very reminiscent of sort of a certain genre or certain like tell-all kind of things. I feel like the characters that the how do they get here tend to all be journalists. You know, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying, like, I have a real dislike for the how did I get here of it all, because it seems irresponsible. And so it's nice to I don't know. That's a weird rant. Moving on. I'm not going to worry so much about Act 2, even though Act 2 is a behemoth and is definitely the bane of every screenwriter's existence. Let's see if we can build out a little bit of Act 3 and sort of work our way backwards a little bit, because I think we have it. And so what kind of people, so she's a prep school person, and so she's going to be absolutely devastated going into Act 2, because this is a reform school. This is a hard as nails school. This is the kind of, it's a prison. You're there. She was sent to a prison, but it's not called a prison because of legality. What kind of people are there? Well, ideally, we want the kind of people that are there are the prison people, but obviously that's not what they're going to be about. Once we learn more about them, they're actually going to be, you know, nuanced people who maybe the big reveal is they're looking at her as we're the same as you. The difference is you got to go to a prep school. I went to a really shady, dangerous inner city public school, and it sucked. And so it was a matter of time when I got here. The fact that you got here as a prep school person, you blew it. And you know, the message being we're all the same. We're who we are. I gotta get back to the getting back to someone though. So maybe let's go do a Romeo and Juliet. I don't know if the getting back to. I'm trying to figure out the getting back to someone. That's the maybe I'll just ignore the about for a while. Ideally, once your idea is solid, once your idea is working, that's when you write your log line, which for me I kind of did with the Center Shading Reform School. But yeah, you know, a good way to sort of litmus test yourself when you're writing is have the log line right on top of whatever you're working on, so that everything you do either is addressing that, either answers that, either pushes you closer to or further away from what is in your log line, because that's really what the story is going to be about. Some people say the log line or the tag line or the through line or the summary, whatever you want to call it. I call it a log line. Some people are saying, make your log line fit your story. I disagree, because that means you haven't been thinking about it the whole time. And so, I don't know. I'm kind of trapped. Let's keep looking. Let me look at the time here. It's almost an hour. Okay. So, well, we know she's so caught doing bad. And so we know the caught doing bad is going to be inverse here. So she's caught doing bad. She's going to do bad. And so let's do a little star here, because that's it's a whole thing. Gonna do bad. That's gonna be right ahead of change now that I'm able to change. Yeah. So actually we're gonna put it here. So it's actually on the other side of this. And so it's a person in a zone of comfort, which is her in her prep school. It ends with her getting busted. She needs something, which is the consequences of the thing, which is basically she needs a reality check. So that's not bulletproof, but I'm okay with what it is. The go is going to the new school. She's gonna end up discovering something that's gonna make her want to try to go after something at this new school, because people are not stagnant. Strong characters are not inherently passive. They're active. They're doing stuff. Find is going to be connected to search. Take is paying the price. And so again, Act 2 is kind of its own unit, really, which is usually what it is. The escape is going to be the escape. And so, man, getting back to someone. So the cheesy version of getting back to someone is getting back to the love of their life, the boy or the girl that they're in love with. It's probably the consequence of how they got busted in the first place. This is a dark comedy, though. Who could that be? Their drug dealer? Is that that's like the kitschy version? I feel like there's been a bunch of those movies all of a sudden where it's the romantic comedy, but instead of it being Prince Charming, it's their drug dealer. I'm thinking of like Shiva Baby, if you've ever seen that. He wasn't a drug dealer. He was just a sugar daddy. Same vibe though. I'm if that makes sense. Let's see here. Oh, my brain's getting tired. Change. Okay, so who does this character need to get back to? Because that's going to define why it's going to be so bad when she shows up at this new school, and then she's going to find an opportunity to go get back to this person using the resources at the school, whatever those resources may be, and then she's going to. So it's going to be adapting to the new school, and then learning from the new school, and the midpoint will be she figured out a way to get back to this person. So maybe we'll work on the midpoint for a second, because the end point, the end of act, the midpoint, the low point, and the end are all very important. I realize I haven't done the midpoint. So she finds a way back. She finds a way out. I forgot, man. I realized it is a dark comedy. So even though it's an art house thriller, because it's a black comedy, it could be burning down it burns down the school. Actually, I kind of like that a lot. So the midpoint is going to be finds a way out. We're going to say burns down school. And not in the horrible mass things that have been happening in the US lately way, but in a like, oh, whoops, God, what was it? What was that show or movie where it's the nerd and I'm realizing it's one of my ideas. Never mind, I'm not pitching that. I almost pitched something that I realized I pitched, and that would have been bad. Yeah, I think there's something interesting there though with the burning down the school in a silly way. Because mistakes happen. People make mistakes. In Wednesday, I wouldn't say they're mistakes, but she does a lot of despicable things. She throws piranhas in the swimming pool and gravely injures one of the swimmers. There's an explosion that melts a statue, which was very classy in its own right. Yeah, no wrong answers. I'm gonna say burn down. I'm gonna say burns down the school in a funny way. Because I don't want this to be about gun legislation. I want this to be like actually character driven and not sort of politically driven. Okay, so finds a way out, and so things are okay, and so I think it has to be that she wins an award, doubles down in prep school, her big plan, things go awry, caught doing bad, which is burning down the school. I mean, there's so many ways to accidentally burn down a school. You could do that in pottery class. You can do that by messing with the sprinkler system. I guess that would be removing the thing that would stop the school from burning down. You could be leaving that one door open that is important to have closed because of reasons. Anecdotally, in college, they were all about, because it was an open campus, people just walked through the campus all the time. After hours, all the doors had to be locked because homeless people, but more importantly, just assholes would sneak in and do shady crap in the school. That happened all the time. So I could see that as a burning down the school for sure. It'd be nice if whatever she did to burn down the school was directly her fault and she just didn't have the wherewithal to see it. But with more perspective, she would have been like, of course, how could it not have happened? That's kind of important. I'm stuck on that side. Let's go to the other side. She gonna do bad. And so the lessons, yeah, let's just make this symmetrical because I'm a big fan of making this symmetrical. So we'll make Act 3 symmetrical to Act 1. And so instead of kidnapped, at the end, it's the school burns down and she gets what she wanted, which I think is to just destroy the school. So I guess her greater mission could be, she wanted to do something in rebellion to her prep school, but once she's at this now much more hellish school, she knows that the only way to do it is to burn it down. So maybe her conclusion of the gonna do bad is that's when she realizes she has to do what she did to the other school by accident. She's gonna do it on purpose. She's gonna burn it down. Maybe that's the movie. Maybe that's what the movie's called, Burn It Down. I don't know. The arson aspect of this, though, I'm not super happy about. It's going to take a lot to really make sure that the final act, burning the school down, is earned, just because that's such a dark, such an inherently grim idea out of context. And so this movie, it's gonna require a lot of tone, making sure the tone is really correct, to making sure the nuances are correct, to make sure that this isn't some sort of social political manifesto, and that it's literally just the story of a epically misguided, too smart for her own good, driven woman placed in a circumstance that allows for a different kind of bad behavior. Did I say enough words in a row? Okay. So return is obviously when she's back at the school, which didn't that happen in Wednesday? I feel like that did. Maybe she got out. Maybe the escape works and she got out, but she realizes because of the ensemble of it all that she abandoned everybody, and that's what's so bad. And so maybe, because I get that. Maybe in Act 1 she's sort of a lone wolf, and she gets caught doing bad because she's the lone wolf, she's the outsider. Maybe that's what burns her. Maybe it's not because she got in with the group that is good at being bad and she's too incompetent, but maybe she was lone wolfing it where she needs a family to help her. I like that as an idea. So maybe she gets out. So I'm going to keep escape fails around because you never know when you're going to need that card, but escape. And she gets out. And so maybe the low point is she gets out and she realizes it's nothing, it's not worth it. It's a completely empty victory. I get that. Ooh. And so her big lesson is she's going to come back. She's back, but we don't know why. But we do know why, and it's because friendship. It's because family. It's because of lessons learned. The dog is beefing. All right. And so now we can sort of emulate her whole thing. She's back, and it's gonna be sort of emulating first act, but it's also gonna be sort of emulating. So back, and so she's the perfect This is where Don't Worry Darling actually did this too, because they literally shocked her and reset her brain and then put her back in, and she was the perfect wife. That was why I thought, given, just say what you want about Don't Worry Darling, but I thought Act 3 actually was excellent with a few exceptions. The perfect pupil. But okay, so she's back. She's the perfect pupil, but she's got a plan. It's all part of the plan. It's the Ocean's 11 of it all. She's going to get together. We'll do one more. She'll be the perfect pupil, and then she'll be tested and is the perfect pupil. Because it's one thing to come back and say, mea culpa, I'm bad, I did all wrong. It's another thing for somebody like an authority figure or a school, based around the idea of treating people bad, to have somebody come back and say, my bad, and them go, really? Well, you're going to have to prove it. You're going to have to sell out your friends. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do that. By coming back, there is proper consequences. Yeah, and so I think that's the move. So she's tested in whatever context that ends up being. But then we see her for who she is, which is when she's with her ensemble. She's ready to lead. We'll say that. And they think that probably means I'm going to show you how I got out because we're going to get out. But I think she's either going to spell it out for him or she's going to keep that in her back pocket where that's really not what it's about. It's about getting revenge on this school. It's about making sure that this school doesn't do this to anybody else. And so when it says she's ready to leave, it's about the fact that she's gonna be what destroys the school because she's decided she's the ideal person for it. She's the only person specifically equipped, and so there's that symmetry again. So she's specifically the worst person to go to this boarding school because she's the silver spooner, she's the valedictorian. How could she have even got herself in this mess to begin with? All the way to at the very end now, she's the only person specifically equipped with both her abilities and her personality, but also the wisdom of what she's gone through at this school to do what she's about to do, which is to, in a very hilarious and non-politically motivated way, burn down the school. It's an evil school, if that's not clear. I just feel like this is going to get clipped. That's all. So she's ready to lead. Okay, so and then we have one more of her sort of. It's going to be it's in Act 3. It's going to be that throwaway where it looks like she's backed off. Oh, the dog. And this is the Ocean's 11 of it all. It's that big misdirection, and so it might even be an audience misdirection where she does all these things where she's like, I'm ready to do what needs to be done, but then when it comes down to it, she sells somebody out, or she does that one thing she's not supposed to do that is in favor of the school. Yeah. Dog, we're gonna have to have a conversation, buddy. But then we go into the finale, and the finale is going to happen really quickly. I figured out when I was doing these with like Don't Worry Darling and that other one, the finale is like 10 scenes, but basically they're really short snippets because you're only getting exactly what you need to. And so it's kind of a pacing thing. At the beginning, the scenes of a movie can be a little bit longer, a little bit more patient because you need time to sort of absorb the information as it's presented to you. You need time to live with them. But by the time you get to the finale, it's the opposite. You've usually seen all these locations, you've seen all these character dynamics, you're expecting characters to act, and so you can sort of fast forward through all the silliness of it, all of the sort of the meandering in the building, because you don't need to absorb anything, you just need the characters to act. And so what would be in the front, 10 scenes, in the back might be 15 or 20 scenes, but much faster paced. Don't Worry Darling, I feel like it was like 30 scenes. maybe it wasn't that, maybe it was 25. Anyway, so gonna do bad things. The plan in action. He might be barking at me because he might be able to see that my light's on and I'm on the second floor. So he might actually just, this might be a political move against me that the dog is outside my window barking because I've upset him by ignoring him. But we went on a really good walk today, so he should be completely unconscious at 8:40 at night, but who knows? The plan in action, we have that one betrayer. And then it's, it comes to a head. / almost fails. And then we have that one piece of information that's going to get us over the line. That critical piece of information, which allows her to get what she wants and satisfy her character journey, which is she's going to burn down the school this time, which is the opposite of what she was trying to do. She burned down the school the last time. And then the rest of that is just is the sort of understanding the ensemble. And so let me see if how much I want to deal with that, because Act 2 is such a beast, and really I am very much of the opinion that even though much of the trailer of the movie is going to be Act 2 because that's where all the money gets spent, because that's where all the fun stuff happens, you build a first act to get the story working, you build a third act to get the story complete and compatible with the story, and then that's usually when I fill in the middle acts. Yeah, so let me see here. What can I do that can actually be, what do we have for time? Yeah, it's not great. We got Go, which is showing up the new school, and then adapting to the school is figuring out that, man, what is she? So it's all about, so it's new school, so the ensemble. And so like I'm kind of working against myself because I said it's a big ensemble, and traditionally, especially in a movie, the big ensemble is in the whole thing. But I'm realizing that I just I don't know, because if the big ensemble, it's very much like a Porky's or like a us against them situation if we make the ensemble happen in the first act. And so for the sake of it's me and my story, I might just abandon the ensemble idea as a storytelling device and just make it about a main character meeting the ensemble, just because, man, ensembles are so much more difficult, especially in film. In TV, they're fine because the great thing about the ensemble is as soon as you run out of steam with one character pairing, you just cut to a different character pairing. And so a lot of times, big ensemble shows might have like 5 stories, A, B, C, D, E. And so you have one pairing A, one pairing B, one pairing C, a different of that group pairing D, another different group or different, several people pairing E. And so you can sort of jump back and forth between the pairings. A movie, it's different in that what happens if some of the ensemble pairings are just inherently weaker than the others. Ideally they shouldn't be, but nobody's perfect. That's when you have problems where I don't know, I'm getting out into the weeds here. I'm going to abandon the ensemble idea as an idea. This is going to be about this prep school girl's mission to get out of this, megalomaniacal boarding school that's meant for punishment and not for reform. Yeah. So, I don't know. There's an adventure in the middle for sure. I don't know where it would be. I'd say anecdotally this is pretty accurate. This is very much how I outline stuff, even though I'm not really making scenes, I'm just making ideas. In that I usually build out the first act and the last act about at the same time, about at this rate, and then I spend probably at least 2 or 3 times longer trying to figure out the middle act because it's such a thing. So I'm not going to do that, but instead I'm just going to walk you through the rest of this because I can't in good faith build out the middle act. I just don't have the brain horsepower anymore to do that tonight. Okay, so once I've built out all the acts, which I haven't obviously, that's when I go back and I test the story wheel, which is this thing right here. Let me just read it again. Actually, I can just pull it up. Let me just read the story wheel. How about that? Do that. So this is the story wheel. So the green is story wheel on the chart. So it's the U character in zone of comfort. So she's in a zone of comfort, and by the end of the zone of comfort, she's going to be out of her zone of comfort because something is going on. And that's the need, that's the want something, and that goes us to the end of Act 1. So the end of the need is when the want comes to a head, when it becomes irrevocably about that for this character. That's when we go into go, which is entering the unfamiliar, which is, a very much a thing of Act 2. That goes all the way until search. And so once you enter the unfamiliar, you adapt to the unfamiliar in that you've given enough time for the unfamiliar to establish that as the new norm. That's when you go into search, which is adapt to it, which is trying to find something in the unfamiliar that is familiar or something towards the familiar. So it's usually a new set of goals. And so a lot of times Act 2 starts with going to a new world, and then the next big beat, the search beat, number 4, is what the new world can offer or what the new world can show. James Cameron's Avatar, the worst possible example in the world. I believe the search moment would probably be the flying dragon thing. It's either that or it's hanging out with the cat girl. I forget how that goes. That's not a good example because of how long and badly plotted it was, but I don't know why I even tried to audition that. Anyway, the end of 4 is the midpoint, the big turn. Usually that is when a character leaves somewhere epic or does something that is irrevocable. Sometimes this can be considered the false ending. Usually that's the low point that happens later, but that's not always the case. But the midpoint is the midpoint. And so usually something in the scene that becomes the midpoint makes the trailer, because that's the big scene where you have character and plot and world all sort of interacting in sort of a very heightened way. Yeah. Going into Act 2B, find what they wanted. And so now that she's set up to search, she's going to find what she's looking for, which is usually it's information, but all of this is through an emotional understanding. I think a lot of why filmmakers, I'll talk about this again at the end too, a lot of why stuff doesn't seem satisfying, especially in feature films, it feels empty or feels hollow or feels like it's not working. It's not because the details of the plot is inherently broken. A lot of times that's true, but it's not strictly the case. And I point to comedies, especially sitcoms, TV sitcoms, as an example of why plot's not the problem, because a lot of times sitcoms are just riddled with inconsistencies, incongruities, plot holes, the whole thing. But because you're carrying on with the characters, because you're going through the character's experience, the emotionality of the character's making emotional choices that drives the plot forward, the broken plot is fine. And so I think a big trap that a lot of filmmakers make, especially with feature films, is they think by fixing the plot, they fix the movie. And in fact, that's not an issue. If the plot's broken, that's going to be annoying, and it's going to be really useful for a lot of websites to address. But as long as the characters are making emotionally driven choices that are accurate to their character, especially in the moment that they're in, so they're in a different headspace in this moment than they are in this moment, they're going to make a different decision. As long as those headspaces are correct, the character motivations are facing the correct direction, when they make a decision that pushes the plot forward, whether or not that plot is broken or not, it works in the context of the character, and therefore it's fine. I point to the first 3 Star Warses that George Lucas did. All of that is very heavily plot driven, but it's plot driven from the point of view of characters making choices. People are telling Luke to use the Force, but it's not until he uses the Force that he actually achieves what he's trying to do. It's his emotional investment in what's happening that makes him make the choice that ultimately destroys the Death Star. Moving on. So find what they wanted, pay the price. This is the adventure. This is the adventure of the story. This is setting up the adventure. This is the adventure. This is paying off the adventure. Building stakes, having fun, paying off the stakes. The big difference, I think, between TV and films is you get more time in the front to build the stakes in a film than you do a TV show, because TV shows you can turn off. And the other thing is, a TV show can have a weaker final couple of acts or final act, with the expectation that if you're still invested, you're going to watch the next episode because you are optimistic about the series as a whole. Whereas a movie, if the third act sucks, if the third act is not satisfying, that could undermine the entire movie. This is, again, one of those examples where Don't Worry, Darling, their third act might be their strongest act. And so if they had even a reasonably satisfying movie up until that third act, I think it would have been an absolute masterpiece, an absolute hit. Because the third act, I couldn't find much wrong with it, honestly. There's a couple scenes that I was like, we already knew that. But short of that, it was a drum tight third act. But unfortunately, everything up until then, it didn't matter. Like it didn't matter that third act was so strong. And so, yeah, feature films, the third act is where it's because that's the act where people walk out of the theaters afterwards and go, we did it. We blew up the Death Star. They all got their medals, that kind of thing. And so if the third act is like, it was all a dream. The evil Twilight baby touched Michael Sheen's face and it was all a dream. Everything you saw has no consequence. And then you go out of the theater and you go, so nothing matters. And so I sat through a Twilight film for an hour and a half and nothing matters. I want my matinee $7 ticket back. Like uncool. Like I could have been sleeping off a hangover, but instead I went to a Thursday morning in December screening of this movie. What the hell? I'm editorializing. I was trying to be funny. I think I missed. Anyway, yeah. So Act 3, return, go back to where you start. A lot of times the characters literally go back to where they start, but it's also from an emotional point of view. They're emotionally returning to a familiar place, but because they have more context, because they have more wisdom, more experience, it's different. It feels different. It's different for them. Where they were confused, where they were on their back foot, where they were unsettled, where they were frustrated, now they are confident or determined or desperate in a lot of tragedy movies. Yeah, so that goes to change. Now the ability to change, and change is literally just the sort of like 5 or 6 beats that are change until the end of the movie are just paying off everything that's set up. This is what is different from feature films and TV shows especially, but I would argue the third act of any TV show is really the last episode of a movie or of a TV series. Let me say that again. I think I said that. I would argue the third act of a feature film works functionally the same as the final episode of a season of television, in that all it's really there to do is to pay off everything that has been set up. And then if it's a TV show that knows it's going to continue on, which most reasonably expect, so they do it anyway, is set up new things for next time. We want you to come back. We're a TV show. We love doing this. Here's paying off all the things that we set up that were so much fun in the first series, or the first season. I was British there for a second, first series. Here's a bunch of teasers for what we could do next time. Doesn't that sound great? One of the things about movies, though, is now movies, because they all want to be franchises, are setting up the same kind of sort of teases that would be in the finale of a TV series or a TV season. They're being set up in the final act of a movie, and most of the time it's super janky. I think Marvel actually did a really good job in that most of the time they're sort of like teases or setups or Easter eggs or post-credit scenes. But a lot of movies, I'm thinking, was it Predator or The Predator? The goofy one with the body armor, where the guy gets superpowered body armor at the end. It's a much bigger world, the whole thing. Oh, it's so janky. So I'm not a studio exec, but just from a storytelling perspective, the idea that the third act is also functionally building a larger world, and that's part of the third act, I think is doing more trouble than it's worth, but that's fine. That's neither here nor there. So that's what it is. Let me see if there's more I can say about this, because I think I kind of ran out of steam there. This always changes. This always changes. If it really ends up either in the writing process or ideally in the outlining process, because I'm telling you right now, even if I've filled out all these cards and turned these cards into scenes and have do some character work and have a much better understanding of the characters and how the characters interact, because that's going to be very important, because again, plot is characters making choices that drive the plot forward. And so characters have to be in an emotional space to do that. And so different character pairings at different moments are going to have different emotional reactions. That's what human interaction is, weirdly enough. All that to say, once this is all plotted out, it could feel like maybe the first act is a little thin, or this section between this and this in Act 2 feels a little thin, and that's when you either throw it out or retool it or try to figure out what's wrong. Most of the time I would argue it's character motivations and character interactions, tracking the emotionality leading to plot by them making choices from an emotional state, because that's what humans are, emotional creatures, typically, social at least. And so a lot of times I'll be in a situation where Act 1 feels absolutely soulless, but then the rest of the movie feels fine. That's usually an indicator that I need to pick something from, Act 2, maybe the midpoint, have that be what Act 1's about. Maybe have what was the midpoint be the end of Act 1, and what was Act 2 will basically be Act 1. That sort of opens up a different gap, and so now all of a sudden, the more interesting things are happening in Act 1, and there's more of an opportunity to pay off the interesting stuff that happened in Act 1 in the further acts. I think patterns being what they are, the most common thing that happens to me is I'll think the midpoint is this thing, and then once we actually get to it in writing, I realize that no, that's not the midpoint. It's either the end of the first act. Occasionally it's the low point. Occasionally the meat of the story is in the first, chunk of the thing, but usually it's the opposite. Usually it's the cut to the chase. It's usually you got to dump a bunch of initial stuff that you set up because you thought it was important that you needed to establish stuff. I'm not a believer in establishing stuff. Act 1 is literally just a function of getting the character in the right emotional space to go on the journey. And that does not mean, here's how I got here, record scratch, flashback. It does not mean, let's spend a bunch of time in her room having her talk to herself and having her journal and having her go, dear diary, blah, blah, blah. We don't need any of that. That's not active. That's not, unless the brother breaks in and steals the diary and that's going to somehow ruin somebody's life because of the details in it. You don't need the Dear Diary stuff at the beginning. You just don't. And so things to look out for. I usually write the log line at the top of whatever I'm working on, because that I need to be able to test scene by scene, moment by moment, character motivation by character motivation against the log line. Usually that's why I spend a lot of time on the log line. Maybe I'll do a live where I actually talk about how to build a log line correctly. Again, the short answer is it's iterative. It's about rewriting it. It's about just constantly adding to it, shaving it down, adding to it, shaving it down, adding to it, shaving it down, testing it with people, adding to it, shaving it down, adding to it, shaving it down, testing with people until it's undeniable, until it basically tells you the movie that it is. That's the cliff notes of it. I think I'll do a live next time on that, actually. But that's the plot. I do also on my scratch pad put stuff that I know is important, details, character details, that kind of thing. Let me go to the chart here. So the left side is scratch pad. Yeah, that's where I put important character moments, even if I don't know where they're going to land. I put that on this list over here. Important character dynamics or character details. If there's anything like talismans or tokens, any kind of inanimate object that has some sort of greater use, a powerful ring, for instance, that's going to go over on my left to make sure I need to check against it to see where it goes to track it. And then it's about reiterating until you run out of space, run out of time, run out of brain power, and you leave it alone. Then you come back to it, you do it again, and eventually you get to a place where you can't find any mistakes, or even if you have adjustments, the adjustments won't meaningfully change anything. That's when you know you're ready to write. It takes different time, sometimes I can outline in Sometimes I can outline in 24 hours or 48 hours, and I'm ready to write. Sometimes, the last thing I wrote took me 2 years to outline, and then I wrote it in 2 days. So, there's no perfect way to do it. There's no unique way to do it. I trust the system that I have because it's worked for me historically. It's always evolving a little bit, but I really do understand the plight of the young writer who hasn't had enough or hasn't had even an individual success where they went, I have an idea, and then however many months or years later they went, the idea is complete. And until you've done that once or at least a few times, you don't have sort of the emotional muscle memory to go, oh my God, I'm stuck in the middle of Act 2. What do I do? You get through it. Time offers a little bit of wisdom, and so eventually you build the muscles, and that's what this is. What I'm showing you. This could all change tomorrow, honestly. I may never outline like this again. I'll tell you right now, I 100% will, because when it comes to TV, especially, outlining is like a 10 times factor when it comes to if somebody goes, hey, we're looking for a series about this and this, and you just hear it and you go, you know what, I've been working on an idea, and you go, hey, can I pitch you this idea in a couple weeks? And they go, sure, yeah. And then I go, okay, it's time to go outline, because it's going to be Boy Horse. It's going to be about centaurs doing romantic stuff. That's a joke from friends from college, that kind of thing. And so outlining does inevitably speed up the process for me. That's not the only way to do it. Again, the novelist community especially, and so I see drama writers a lot do this because they come from sort of the novelist world a lot of times, except for the ones that do plays, which is different too. But the novelist kind of brains will just write, and they'll write and they'll write and they'll write, and it either fits or they go and rewrite it later and sort of readjust it. I'm a big believer in the outline. I'm a big believer in this just because it works for me, and if I put it on the board, I can explode it out and I can see without having to go line by line in the script where things are working, where things make sense. Because at the end of the day, the experience of as a screenplay reader, as a professional reader, the litmus test for the quality of writing is the writing easy to understand? Is the writing is in such a way that it's efficient and I'm not physically exhausted reading it, or I'm not getting confused? So, if I read a script and I'm 5 pages in and I didn't realize I've read 5 pages, I thought I read 1, that's a well-written script. But short of that, it's really just down to planning and outlining and making sure that, everything is congruent with what it's trying to do, and everything is, internally consistent. Yeah, all of that. And so it does seem like a level of sort of dark magic or chaos magic, but at the end of the day, it's just it's revising and iterating, and just you just grind it out until you stop grinding. Once I would be done with the script, just for what it's worth, I workshop it, and not once. I workshop it many times, because taking any script to one workshop and having them workshop, even if you're workshopping the whole script at one time, that's not the solution. It just isn't. You're not going to fix it all in one go. You're not nobody's Tarantino. Tarantino is not even technically Tarantino, but he is. And so workshopping is really where I think scripts, especially feature scripts, find their legs, find their voice, find their way of doing it. All this outlining stuff is just to get you after the first step. This outline, once it's done, will ultimately be what I make my vomit draft, which is my first draft that I don't show anybody. And once I've made my vomit draft, I try to force myself to stay away from it long enough to reset my brain, which usually takes about 4 weeks. And then I'll go back through, and I might even re-outline it again using this same outlining to make sure that I did what I set out to do, and make sure I'm not leaving anything on the table. Because sometimes in the writing, actually a lot of times in the writing, you find little nuances, you find little things, you find characters that you're falling in love with that are not the main character, and you want to write towards what you love because it's gonna show. And so, yeah, it's there's nothing wrong with outlining. There's nothing wrong with not outlining, but this is how I do it. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say before I call this a night, because this has been a whole thing. For what it's worth, again, if you didn't show up for the beginning, I did this all in this just based on using man, my brain just got really tired. Yeah, so this is the sort of the template that I went off of, and the reason I did this is I used Netflix's shuffle feature to sort of just give me ideas. And so Dead to Me, 1899, Elite, Slumberland, and Dahmer. That gave me what I wanted to start with. I think it's very important to actually not do this. I mean, if you're an established writer who's pitching somebody, and so they're gonna take pitches from you, they're gonna give you what they want. They're gonna tell you what they're looking for to begin with. Sometimes they're gonna say, "Hey, we got this property." This is not how Wednesday got made. I know that for a fact. But it's, "Hey, we want to reboot the Addams Family. We think we want to reboot Wednesday Addams and for a new generation because she's the classic goth girl. Bring us your pitches on how you would do a Wednesday show." Admittedly, that's not how they did this. I think they did the opposite. I think they tried to get the rights to Wednesday and then wrote to Wednesday, but they were also the showrunners for Smallville, so they already had enough clout to not even bring anything. They could have just said, "Hey, we did Smallville. Can we do this?" Anyway, the idea is king. All of what I've done today is basically of no consequence if the idea isn't absolutely undeniable. I just wanted to demonstrate that even with just basically rolling the dice on ideas, I could do it in front of you if I had to. That's really what I'm trying to accomplish because, I think I'll probably do a live stream at some point on, what it takes to have an idea that's worth having. But yeah, I'm overwhelmed. I assume you guys are overwhelmed too. Let me see if there's any comments. Nope, I'll delete those later. That's fine. Yeah, was this helpful? Let me know. If you have questions about outlining, I hope this answered some of them. The short and the long of it is find a system that works for you and do that. And short of that, best of luck to you. And even if you don't like outlining, even if this is nails on a chalkboard to you, whatever you can do to get your script ready for workshop, that's what you got to do. And then put it into a workshop and try to find people you trust, try to find people whose opinion actually is relevant, not only to helping you, like they like the things you like, but more importantly, that their opinion is actually provable, that they have enough experience in doing what they're doing, that when they say do this, there's actually something behind it instead of just what if we tried this. Workshop stuff, that's all I'm trying to say. Get in a workshop and take the notes. If you're absolutely starting out and you have no connections at all, get into a workshop or start a workshop yourself, and just know that you're not going to get absolute studio level notes. You're just not. But if everybody's saying the same thing, if everybody's giving you basically the same note, take the note because there's something going on there. I'm a big believer that if you're an English language person, if you're raised in the West, if you watch movies, if you grew up watching movies in the West, you have most of the hardware already up here. It's just most people don't have a way to describe it because they've never had to. That's what screenwriting is. That's what workshopping is. And so don't necessarily give your script to your mom because she's going to tell you it was the best because you're their child. But if 10 people say, "Hey, I didn't understand this," or "This got slow for me," don't take it personally. Just take the note and fix it and make sure that never happens again. So, anything else? I need to drink some water and maybe take a nap because my brain hurts. Thanks for thinking. Catch you